Hello, in this quick video I'm just going to talk briefly about SEND and some potential strategies you might use within your departments. Like always with our professional development, these are just some ideas that you obviously need to discuss in your teams and know how that applies within your subject specific domain. So I'll start with the recommendations from the Education Endowment Foundation, and they've got a big document on SEND, but they've kind of synthesized 5 key ideas. One being that you create a positive and supportive environment for all pupils without exception. 2, you build an ongoing holistic understanding of your pupils' needs. 3, that you ensure all pupils have access to high quality teaching, and particularly that first line here, to a great extent, good teaching for pupils with SEND is good teaching for all pupils. So if you are looking at cognitive science and neuroscience, and if you're applying those strategies we've been talking about in our professional development, then that's good teaching for SEND as well. 4 is that you complement high quality teaching with carefully selected small group and one-to-one interventions. And 5, working effectively with teaching assistants. What we should say here is they're very clear within this guidance that the role of SEND is for all of us. It is not just the domain of the teaching assistants, the TAs, and Emma as the Senko. So I'm just going to start and end with the number 3. So ensure all pupils have access to high quality teaching. I'm going to link this to some of the things we've been talking about recently in professional development. Particularly they make recommendations for, and you can see it at the bottom there, explicit instruction and scaffolding. So these are 2 things that we're going to talk about just quickly in this video. So we're going to start briefly with looking at cognitive load theory, which obviously we did just before Christmas, because a lot of the recommendations around explicit instruction and scaffolding are made with an understanding of cognitive load theory. That's why they're doing. They're looking at the difference between obviously working memory, long-term memory, and trying to utilize that in the classroom. So just a reminder really of some of those takeaways we had just before Christmas. So if we're applying cognitive load theory in the classroom, firstly, we've got to chunk learning, so that there are a maximum really of 2 or 3 essential pieces of information or skills that are going to be taken away. I think in Neil's video, we call that obviously our golden nuggets. What is the main thread of the lesson? 2, that all the information in the lesson relates to the main learning goal, that we eliminate redundant tasks. We want to reduce the load on our working memory. So we're trying to really eliminate any redundant tasks. 3, that scaffolding has been provided for learning. We know that obviously students are novices, so we need to build those, provide those scaffolds so that obviously they become experts. Their schemas are not as developed as ours, so we need to provide that bridge for them to get there. 4, that students have the opportunity to generate previous knowledge. All new knowledge or new learning, we said, it has got to connect with what we know previously. So if we generate and activate that previous knowledge, that's really important. And then 5, that the new information has got to relate to the previous knowledge. So we need to try and make that explicit. How does this fit within the schema that we've been developing? And 6, and a really important one, is obviously that we need the same expectations, same high expectations for everyone in the class. I think they called it the Goldilocks Effect. So obviously your belief in students does have an impact on how well they do. Now I just want to unpick a little bit quickly about what we're talking about when we're talking about scaffolding in the classroom and scaffolding learning, because that can be maybe a vague term. What do we actually mean? So here are just 6 quick things that potentially you might do in your lessons. So one way of scaffolding is obviously question students, check their understanding. So you would actually have to come back to some of the misconceptions, you'd build on it to make sure that their schema is relevant for the new learning. That we break the task into smaller, more manageable parts. We did some work last year on the difference between the composites, which are the kind of the big ideas, and the components, which are the building blocks for those composites. So how are you in your department, and hopefully you've got a kind of shared understanding of that within your department, how do you break things down? Thinking out loud, verbalizing the thinking process when completing a task. I know that lots of you, I've seen it in lots of classrooms, use visualizers to talk through your thinking process as you're going. So that's excellent practice. So maybe as a department you think, well, actually that's something that we do for SEND. We use visualizers to break it down to model effectively. We know that vocabulary in all subjects, doesn't matter what subject it is absolutely crucial, because we're always talking about language. I know I showed you some research about maths and how obviously the vocabulary in maths is crucial to their ability to be successful. So are we pre-teaching the vocabulary? So are we introducing the words? Have we really thought about what's going to come up in that lesson and made sure they're really explicit on those beforehand? We could use worked examples. So a worked example is a kind of partially completed example that students will then complete in order to build confidence, and you've shown and demonstrated step by step how to perform a task or to solve a problem. Again, I know that lots of you do that, particularly again with your visualizer. You break down step by step the process to make sure that students are successful. 6, have we ensured the learning is sequenced so that long-term memory is utilized? Do things fit in an order in which one thing builds on another? So again, in your department, that's a strategy potentially you've used. You've really thought about how you sequence your learning so that actually it builds successfully. And finally, in this video, just a recap on what we mean by explicit instruction. So the recommendation is that you try and use explicit instruction. Obviously, we know that as students become more expert, then there is potential for more less explicit instruction. You've got to think about when it is appropriate. But for SEND students and for all students, as the recommendation says, this is really because they are novices, because of those limitations of their schemas, is something that will likely produce better learning. So I've just put here obviously the Rosenstein model. So we know that we have daily review of previous learning. So we know we have that through our retrieval, and we've adapted the retrieval this year. So you know that you can use the long-term retrieval and the more immediate retrieval. 2, again, we've talked about these before, breaking things down into small manageable chunks. 3, asking questions. So the most successful teachers spend about half the lesson just asking questions, making sure students are clear about what they're doing. Have we provided models? Do we know what success looks like? Guided student practice. So obviously you guiding students through that practice is really important. And again, with all of these things, it's about being as explicit as possible with the students about what you're doing and why you are doing it. It's not a mystery why you're using this model. You're using it because actually you want to show them what success looks like. 6, checking for understanding. 7, and again we talked about this before Christmas, about obtaining a high success rate. Self-efficacy is a really important part of learning. Students' belief system, their belief that they are good at that subject is something that will obviously garner their attention. It will make sure that they can build on that success. If we set students up with maybe, I don't know, a very open-ended kind of discovery task where actually we've not been very clear about what success looks like, we've not ensured that all students are successful, then actually we've probably failed them a little bit there. 8, scaffolding for difficult tasks. Again, we've just talked about that before. 9, lots of independent practice. And then 10, weekly and monthly review of it so that we consolidate that knowledge, so we build it into the long-term memory. So again, like we said, nothing new here really. All things that we've been covering extensively for the last 2 years. So this is what those recommendations are. And now obviously it's over to you to really think about, how do you actually do this in your departments? So I'm going to leave you with this question that hopefully you will now spend some time with talking about in your team, so that you are very clear and everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet about how you prove that your curriculum is ambitious for all, in particular those with special educational needs. What do you do as a department? I've just given you obviously some generic strategies, but what do you actually do in your department to improve the outcomes of SEND students? We know nationally that there is a gap, a big gap. It is widening. It widens once we get to secondary school. So what do we do to try and close those gaps?